Welcome to the lighter side of the spectrum, the podcast that celebrates the multiple hats we wear and the juggling acts we perform in life. Whether you're parenting kids and teens on the autism spectrum, navigating the ever-evolving healthcare industry, or building a more inclusive and impactful world, this is your space to find connection, inspiration, and growth. Together, we'll share stories, tackle challenges, and explore how innovation and inclusion create better outcomes for everyone. Because no matter the spectrum, there's always a lighter side. Now here's your host, David Coffer.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to the lighter side of the spectrum. I'm David Coffer, and most of you know that this show exists because of my son, Stone. Stone is 20, non-speaking and autistic, and he communicates primarily by typing or letterboard, and he learned this methodology called spelling to communicate, or S2C. And because of S2C, Stone has gone from being denied access to his own education to now scoring in the 90th percentile, exiting special education entirely and actively pursuing college. He is obviously one of the most remarkable people I know, and I'm so lucky to be his dad. But getting here has been a fight. And part of what's made it a fight is an organization many families may have never heard of. And this is the American Speech Language Hearing Association, better known as ASHA. ASHA has taken an official position against spelling to communicate and related methods. And because ASHA credentialing touches virtually every speech language pathologist who works in our schools, that position has real consequences for real kids and their families. We've seen it play out in courtrooms and in due process hearings across the country. And we've seen it play in our own family's life. Today's guest has been fighting against ASHA from the inside of the profession for years, and I've been eager to get her back on the show for a specific reason I'll get to in a moment. But Dr. Jeanette Benegas is a speech language pathologist, a researcher, and the founder of Fix SLP, a grassroots advocacy organization that's been challenging ASHA's practices and its hold on the profession for a few years now, since 2023. She has nearly 40,000 followers on Instagram, incredible, and a widely listened to podcast, which is awesome. I highly recommend it. And as you will hear today, a level of knowledge about ASHA's inner workings that I think is going to be a genuine surprise for many of you. So with all that being said, Jeanette, welcome back to the lighter side of the spectrum.
Thanks for having me again, except our first episode never aired because we had some issues happen. So I'm glad to be back and finally do this for real.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that. I was going to mention, yes. So it was almost exactly a year ago, I believe, that we were kind of in midstream of our podcast. And unfortunately, Stone had a seizure. He has epilepsy, and he had a seizure. He had fallen out of bed, and, it was, as far as seizures go, kind of a fairly serious one, but obviously interrupted our flow, and life happened. I'm glad that you stuck with me and we're able to do this again. And a lot's happened in a lot of ways. I think we probably have even more to talk about now than we did a year ago, right?
Yeah. Everything, like I just said before we started recording, kind of everything happens for a reason. So yeah, I'm so much more knowledge than I did even a year ago. So
as do I. So just for our listeners and viewers, why do you kind of give a basic background, your SLP, who you are, and kind of like how you got into this world?
Sure. So I am, you already said, Jeanette Benegas. I went into speech language pathology as a bright-eyed high school student, thinking I was going to be someone who treated kiddos with autism. That's what I wanted to do. That is not where my life landed. So I went through school, started practicing. I started in a private practice where I was there for half the time. And then I was in a charter school for kids who, we don't call it this anymore, but they had Asperger's syndrome and ADHD. So the whole student population had one or both of those diagnoses. And then I moved into the school setting for 2 years where I did K through K through 7, and was in special education rooms. And it was at that time that I realized I love adults with dementia. And,
That's interesting, though. Yeah.
yeah, and this was in 2000, I'd say around 2007, 2008 was when I really discovered this and learned that I maybe wasn't paying close enough attention in school because I didn't think I was going to treat that. So started going to some conferences and learning about adults, and landed myself with an invitation to The Ohio State University to research both dementia and swallowing issues, because at the time there was very little research on how to help folks like that. So I ended up researching with the late Michelle Bourgeois, who was our top dementia researcher in the country, and got a PhD, and have taught at many locations all over the country, either as full-time or as adjunct, and left in 2004 as a full professor to kind of pursue Fix SLP. At the same time in all of this, I also started an endoscopy company. So to pay my bills, I pass cameras through people's noses and watch them swallow at the bedside in nursing homes, which is...
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that's what
it's a complete
entails.
departure from what I thought I was going to do at 18. So, but Fix SLP is, I think, why I'm here today. And it just kind of landed in my lap. Lots of people want me to tell my story and how do you start an advocacy firm and do all these things. And I just was someone who noticed and did what I thought needed to be done, and was, it just kind of grew. So again, a handful of years ago, I noticed there were a lot of issues in our field that needed advocacy work done, specifically in the medical setting.
There's Stone making his appearance.
Specifically in the medical setting. And I thought, man, the only way to push advocacy through this field is through the American Speech, Language, and Hearing Association. And some of the issues that were popping up directly involved them. So how do you advocate for something that's the opposite of what they want? And I kept seeing it happen over and over and over again. And so one thing led to another, where I got involved with other SLPs, other SLP leaders, and we were in between projects and started posting about the Certificate of Clinical Competency, which is what you see many SLPs sign after their names. It's part of their credentials. What a friend and I came to realize was that ASHA has been masquerading this CCC as the gold standard and as a license for 50 years, when in fact, certificate is in the name. It is a private certification that is either equal to the state license or actually inferior to the state license in every state except North Dakota and Hawaii. But they do this because it is how they make millions and millions and millions of dollars every year. So they do nothing to correct people when people refer to the CCC as our national license or our national board or ASHA as our governing body, when really they are a membership association, just like the Rotary Club or Girl Scouts.
Right. I laugh, but no, legally that's true, right? I mean,
that's they run under the same set of rules. And yes, they are every profession really does or should benefit from a membership association, because you do need professionals coming together, sharing research and sharing ideas and kind of laying out best practices. Which I think where you guys have kind of gotten caught in the middle of their opinion versus what you know to be true. Those are very different things. And then it harms your families and your children because, again, they're being masqueraded as a governing body and they do nothing about that mislabeling. And so once we started posting about that, we very quickly went what I called SLP viral, because there's only depending on what you look at, there's 160 to 200,000 SLPs licensed in the country. So, very quickly took off. And then a couple months later, actually 2 days after I left academia, ASHA announced that they were raising the rates of the CCC by $25, which isn't a lot. But the crowd went wild because most SLPs don't find value in this thing, and it is required in many instances by employers and in just a small handful of states, Medicaid for billing, and we don't have the choice. And so ASHA has also made it so you cannot be a member of their association unless you purchase their product. And they have some pricing issues there where if you look at their financial records, they spend a lot on membership benefits and very little on the CCC program because really it's just a certificate. But they flip the pricing because we are tied to the CCC. So we pay like $221 or something for the CCC, which costs them very little, and we pay $29 for the membership.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you can get the pricing, yeah, that's good.
And I know we're going to talk about some antitrust things, but that's an act violation. I mean, there's so many issues that I've learned about over the last couple of years. So my podcast ended up hitting number 67 on the Apple Top 200 business chart without trying. It's been wild. And what I love about the SLPs in our community is that they donate money. I call it sustaining partnerships to pay for podcast streaming and the website and, you know, all of the legal action we've looked into and taken with lawyers. And I'm completely funded by donations. I have not paid myself or anyone who right now I do it alone, but over the years, there's been people
you've worked with others. I mean, you've had like a really great group that I know, because I've been a big fan and, you know, listener to it. I've learned a ton through the podcast.
Yeah, but none of us have taken pay from those donations. Now I've been paying myself when I do it through podcast advertisements and sponsorships and things like that. So I do make a little, but largely it has been a volunteer position that somehow took over my life, but I love it. I love it. And it has led to meeting really interesting people like you and others in the field and outside of the field and doing really solid work. I mean, we've changed Medicaid policy in a couple of states. We've seen lots of employers change their job requirements. And, you know, I say now that I could quit doing, and the train is on the track. This kind of advocacy work is going to keep going whether I'm here or not. And so now
I think it needs you, Jeanette. I think you still need, the train needs an engineer, you know, it still needs someone to drive it. But the point well taken. I mean, it's created momentum and, like you said, some real change. You're on the radar for ASHA without a doubt.
Oh, 100%.
Right. You know, which is great. Now, but let's talk about, you know, kind of going back to the, you know, ASHA, like we said, is basically a membership, technically a nonprofit, right? Association, or I forget the classification, but they have no legal authority, the bottom line.
Yeah.
Why are so many SLPs afraid of it? What are they actually scared of?
I think it is decades of indoctrination, and it's a deep history. When it was first founded by, I don't know, 5 to 10 SLPs with PhDs many years ago, like the 30s or the 40s or something like that. And it was an elitist association. They were the best of the best. They were putting out all of the research that people were using, and those people were revered. And they only admitted a couple every year, and you had to have the same credentials as they did. And it was, you know, you made it. If you made it into ASHA, you made it, right?
Yeah, okay.
So they then realized, hey, we could make money off of this if we sold affiliate membership. So that's when they started selling affiliate memberships to practicing speech pathologists. And I think where they gained their authority or perceived authority is that we are a very, very young profession compared to like physical therapy or
right.
That back then, there was no state license in our field. So if you are working with a teacher or a medical professional, you want them to have a state license because that means there's a standard. And when our field started in the 40s, 30s, there was no license. And so that's why the CCC was created. It was created to show consumers, it was a consumer protection product, showing consumers that anyone could hang a shingle, but if you want a real SLP, you get
Yeah.
one with the CCC. Well,
Sure.
Florida was the first state to start to implement a state license, and I can't remember off the top of my head what year, but again, many older listeners, baby boomers, you were alive when that happened. The last state to implement a license was Colorado in 2016.
Well, it's pretty recently.
Right. And
Yeah.
so really that is when ASHA should have stepped back and said, okay, the CCC isn't needed anymore, but now it's bread and butter to fund pensions, programs. They have a lot of power. And because they've tied it to the membership, most membership associations, like I always compare PT, OT, because they're the closest to us, their membership retention is somewhere around 20%, give or take 5%, 10%, depending on the year. When I started Fix SLP, ASHA's membership retention rate was 98%, and they were winning awards for that. Again, because they had it tied to the CCC, and that's something I brought to light. They don't even advertise. When you purchase the CCC, they don't even advertise that the membership and the certification are two separate costs, that you can, in fact, buy the CCC without the membership. And so it's not even a renewal application every year. You have to call them and endure I call it their snaky sales pitch on why you should keep it in order to just get rid of this membership. And so I think that's where it started. And then so people became afraid because you do a lot of work to become a speech therapist. You can't lose your license. And ASHA has an ethics board. ASHA's ethics board only controls what you do if you purchase the CCC. If you don't have the CCC, they can't do a darn thing. And the only power that they have is to take away your CCC. But we live in a world right now where many employers require it. So if you don't have a CCC, you can't work. Doesn't matter if you have a state license. So
that's amazing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that could have such a power over employment. So you could see why, a lot of these SLPs, particularly those, again, they're not in private practice, obviously, but if you're working for a school district or
something
whoever.
else that they've done to intertwine themselves into the district is they've seen the writing on the wall. So they know that this is a losing battle. There's not a lot they can do because a Federal Trade Commission standards, they can't do a lot. So they have to get creative. And we always say that everything they do is barely legal. So one door they have is into the schools. And many schools will give teachers a pay bump by of like $5,000+ a year if they have a national board certification. Well, speech pathologists, and rightly so, have advocated to use the CCC as that thing. Even if in their state the CCC is inferior, like it's harder in Ohio to get the state license than it is the CCC. But we don't have anything to attach ourselves to. There is no national board certification. So ASHA has actually developed a program to help SLPs advocate for this in their schools to get this bump. And it's forever going to tie SLPs in schools to the CCC if they do this, because who doesn't want $5,000 a year more? When I propose, like, why?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good return on your investment, right? Like, again, if you're.
Yeah, we all have to have it. And here's like the mind-blowing thing, that it's not something I would have said a year ago, but have come to realize now as they're redoing the standards, is that there is no accredited college program in the there is no non-accredited speech program in the United States. Every graduate program at this time is either accredited or in process to be accredited. ASHA also owns our only accreditation body. And the CCC requirements and the accreditation requirements are the same. And actually, in fact, the Yeah, the accreditation standards are actually more because they're requiring certain courses, whereas the CCC just requires that you graduate from an accredited program. So you're already getting an SLP, and I'm going to say this with the exception of North Dakota, which we're not even
Okay.
talking about. But in every other state, you are getting an SLP with the same training if they graduated from an accredited program. So you don't if an SLP has their master's degree in any state but North Dakota, if they've already done the work, why do we have to have the CCC? So they're just
That's wild.
everywhere.
But again, that kind of shows the vertical integration, right? In terms of the domination within a single industry or profession, kind of pivoting towards the antitrust angle that I do want to talk about, because you've looked at this hard. Actually, you've done more than looked at it, Jeanette. You've taken action. I want you to talk about that in terms of what you saw and what you see from an antitrust standpoint from within the industry.
Yeah, so it was the very first thing we did through Fix SLP, and it was quiet for a really long time, but we filed a complaint with the FTC about their antitrust issues, and the biggest issue is that they charge $29 for membership. I could not start a speech membership association, charge $29 a person, and provide all of the benefits that they provide. So they grew into an accidental monopoly, but they also do nothing about it. Even more interestingly, what shows this is in the 70s, they were sued for tying,
right?
Which means that you couldn't buy the CCC unless you were a member. So they were blocking entry into an entire profession by requiring you to be a member of their association, and that is solidly illegal. You cannot block an entire profession with your private credential. You know. Businesses can't do that.
Yeah.
So that, I believe, ended up settling out of court, and that person kind of went away. That was probably part of the settlement. So she didn't appeal. You know what? I think she lost on a technicality, and then they settled out of court instead of doing an appeal. But what followed was them flipping the tie. So at the time, the membership was the higher priced item. But that's, again, how they were making their money. So they flipped the tie, and the CCC became the higher priced item, which now leads us to a Sherman Act violation. So they block other people from creating competition because of their pricing structure, which is really the simplest thing. And so we didn't hear back. You don't hear back when you file FTC complaints. But what it did was start a paper trail, or perhaps add to a paper trail that's already been there. So for folks like you, if you're filing complaints, that's just adding to the stack of paperwork that they have on the American Speech, Language, and Hearing Association. And so it's free, it's easy, it's something to do that may or may not make an immediate difference, but could make a difference in the long run if they decide to take a closer look at the organization. So that's how it started. About a year later, we discovered that in their bylaws, they permit changes to the bylaws by submitting a petition with 2% membership signature, which was, at the time when we did it, it was about just shy of 6,000 signatures. So we worked with an attorney to put together a petition that would require fair and accurate pricing with financial transparency from the American Speech, Language, and Hearing Association. And we put that out. And it was a ton of work because none of us have business training. None of us are trained advocates. I always say we do this in real life and we make it up as we go.
Sure. Yeah.
But it was an interesting week. There were a lot of days where a few of us were up till 4 a.m. But we collected over 6,000 signatures in 5 days. And at the same time, ASHA saw what we were doing and tried to change the bylaws themselves by not permitting this anymore. So whenever they do that, whenever they change their bylaws, they have to put out a 30-day comment period before they vote. And so we made sure that this thing was wrapped up and on their doorstep with tracking. So we had a signature before that vote happened. So we wrapped it up. We sent those signatures. We sent it digitally. And I went to UPS and sent like 800 pages of
Oh, wow.
signatures in a box straight to their doorstep with signature required upon receipt. So we knew they had it. And what should have happened next was they should change the bylaws to flip this tie and give transparency with pricing. And what they did instead was they took it to the board for a vote, which wasn't part of the bylaws. So they broke their bylaws, and bylaws are legally binding. A board has to follow the bylaws. That's why they
Yeah.
are. But they didn't. They didn't follow the bylaws. They took a vote, and it's because they know that if they do this, if they flip this tie, they're going bankrupt, because people will stop purchasing membership. And if that is the thing that has the higher price point, they're sunk. So they're going to do everything they can to protect the CCC and the membership at the current price point, because that's how they keep their doors open. And they have financial responsibilities too with pensions and investments and things like that, to investors. So that's that.
And we're talking big dollars too.
Yeah.
Again, you looked into their books and the budgets. Some of these budget items were
Wild.
wild, right? Like the one that sticks out is like the catering.
Oh yeah. A couple years ago, the catering, what they spent on catering was higher than they spent on advocacy. And, naysayers will be like, well, they have to spend that much to get a convention center. And that's fine, but they should be spending more on advocacy. We are one of the lowest paid professions out there. I know that in Ohio for Medicaid, up until a few years ago, our reimbursement was $37 a session. So it didn't matter if that session was 5 minutes or 500 minutes, we were getting $37.
Oh,
How do
wow.
you keep a
Just a
business
session.
open? How do you keep a business open? And our one billing code, which is, I don't know if we'll talk about this today, but it will be changing in January, unfortunately. The Medicaid reimbursement rate for that is $75. So different insurance plans might pay slightly more. That's pretty rare. Mostly they pay the same or less. And that is for almost every treatment we provide, with the exception of like swallowing and some AAC stuff. But $75 a session is the standard for our reimbursement rate. So clinicians aren't making a lot of money, especially, if they're part of a bigger system where, hospitals or schools or other levels have to make money. We don't make a whole lot. So they really should be advocating for us, especially in that area.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what I think people expect from a professional organization, right? Like a membership-based organization that's supposed to be advancing the cause for its members. And you're not really seeing that. You're seeing a lot of, I think, self-preservation, self-protection, and again, just a lot of money. I want to circle back to the antitrust issue because when you and I had chatted about this a few weeks ago, you mentioned, you've kind of looked into taking further legal action and talking to law firms that specialize, in antitrust law. But, they basically, and I'm tell me if I'm wrong, kind of said, yeah, we think there might be a case here, but it's just too small.
Yeah. So that is the big holdup for me, is that, yes, many lawyers have said, yeah, there's antitrust all over this. However, there's only 200,000 of you, and we're talking about a $250 payment every year with a potential statute of limitations. And so the way that antitrust usually works is that a very large firm who knows that there's a case here will take it on, and they'll pay for it up front. And they make their money on the back end by taking part of whatever is awarded. And that's how
Yeah, they get a percentage of the settlement,
yeah.
right?
But when you're
Yeah.
talking about a $250 product across less than 200,000 people, even the establishment of a class isn't worth it. So I think from what I've heard from these lawyers, the establishment of a class is very hard. It takes a long time and it's expensive. The lawyer who has taken us most seriously talked money with us a lot, and he said expert witnesses alone for a case like this would be $1.5 million. Well, how are we paying for that, right?
Yeah. Where's that money coming
Yeah,
from?
for speech
Right.
pathologists, that's the problem, is that the money that goes into this isn't worth it to a firm to take on. And so he said, you can fund this yourselves as a class. But again, I just told you how much we make. Where's the
Right.
money coming from?
Yeah.
Audiologists have sued ASHA and successfully won and started alternative membership associations and been very successful with that. And I work with one of the lawyers who has been involved in multiple of those lawsuits. I said, where did the money come from? Now, they haven't done a class action, but I said, for all of these lawsuits, where
Still.
did the money come from? And he said, hearing aid companies. We don't have anything.
Oh, interesting.
Speech pathologists. We don't have a company like that. With hearing aid companies are basically a cash system that again have millions of dollars and they need their audiologists to be happy and successful. We don't have that. So that's been the holdup with a class action in terms of certification and membership and all of the issues intertwined with our particular case because we just don't have the people and the money isn't worth it. So there have been some other avenues specifically related to this petition that we might be able to take because they clearly did break laws. But I had to put a pause on that. I was gearing up to take that to the SLP community at the end of January, beginning of February of this year, 2026. And then we had some code issues that I was hired as a consultant to help with, and it just consumed my life for months. So I haven't quite circled back, but that's kind of where we've left it is I've kind of accepted. I don't know that we have a class action right now simply because of the money, not because there isn't one. But you, as
Yeah.
a group of parents with children who have disabilities or
Millions of us.
disabilities, you have some ideas that I've even suggested, or the oral motor community has very similar issues. So if you're all coming together, there might be a much bigger class and people with disabilities are, they're a protected population. I think
Right.
sometimes in the courts that's taken a little more seriously than, and this is true, than 150,000 white women being, because we're predominantly white,
Oh, the SLP
right?
community, right?
We have very small percentage of people who aren't white or men. So we're not taken quite as seriously as a group of parents with children who have disabilities. And so your ideas, I think, might go a little further just because there's some nuance that we don't have. So unfortunately, that's where I'm at with all of this. I'm committed to continuing to take action. It's just, it's a hard road and everything takes so long.
It takes a long time. Yeah, it's a grind. But I'm glad that you opened that door. And like you said, there's up to roughly 200,000 SLPs in that area. But, when you're talking about parents and families who have non-speaking children in the system, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we are talking about millions, literally,
Right.
even within the US.
Right.
And there's no doubt that ASHA is actively doing everything it can to block access to alternative methods of communication, we'll call
Sure.
it, right? Like they treat, we talk about the gold standard. They love to throw that around, right?
Mm-hmm.
Speech, in their world, speech is considered the gold standard. That should be the ultimate goal. And now, again, most of us want that, but it shouldn't be at all costs to anything else, right? And one of the many issues I have is that you see that so blatantly promoted, and we saw this again in our own experience with our speech therapists. It's just when we talked about exploring other methods, it was basically shut down. It's like, no, that's, you don't want them doing that because then they'll just become too dependent on that. They won't work on speech, really kind of ridiculous types of statements. But as far as ASHA is concerned, they have that positioning statement, right? That they provide to SLPs who hand it out. They have it on their website. They now have sections of their website actively advocating against these methods of communication, including training school-based SLPs how to respond if a parent requests this methodology
Yeah.
or this types of accommodation in an IEP. So they
Yeah.
are actively, again, to me, this seems like they are blocking access. They're using their dominant position in the marketplace. And you talked about this. I love that you brought that up, Jeanette, in terms of the governing body,
Hmm.
this perception. That is very real because we actually have documentation in our own case with Stone. 3 separate occasions, we have 3 written documents from the school district that refer to ASHA as the governing board or the governing body, which isn't true. But that's what they're trying to use as their legal basis. That's what they try to use as their legal grounds to deny accommodations. So I think again, and also when you look at, like, we were talking about the vertical integration, you need to have an ASHA credentialed. So they're controlling the credentialing at the university level,
Yep.
and then you have to have that to get a job, and then you have to have a CCC to get a job. I mean,
Yep.
that's like they've got the whole funnel there.
They sure do. And again, it's barely legal. Getting, everything they do almost crosses the line, but doesn't. So addressing it gets really difficult, which is that's how Fix SLP has been so successful is I'm not a lobbyist. I am an SLP in Ohio, just being loud and encouraging other people to be loud and giving them the resources and the tools they need to make the changes they want to see in their states because we're doing some work in Michigan where we have a bill that has gone successfully past the House and it's now getting ready to go through the Senate. I am licensed in Michigan, so I have been very active in the work there. But if I wasn't licensed, Michigan doesn't care about Jeanette. Michigan cares about their stakeholders, right? Michigan doesn't care
Yeah.
what ASHA has to say either. They care about the licensing board. What does the licensing board have to say? What do the stakeholders in the state have to say? And so that's how we've seen success. And just many lawyers have said it's going to be cheaper and easier to change this at the state level with employers than it will be to go after them in court. So for us, that's kind of what I've leaned into. But yeah, I mean, yeah, and I said this to you on the phone. If parents are seeing that language, the governing body right there, that's room for appeal because the governing body is the state licensing associate or the licensing board, which is different in every state. In some states, it is a speech and hearing board. In other states, it's wrapped up with medical professionals, and in some states, it's even the teaching realm. But every state has a board that oversees our license, and every state has a license. So that is the governing body, not ASHA. So that's
That's so
information.
important. I mean, I think we have to raise an awareness around that. Now, we do have some good news in this field recently, and you and I didn't get a chance to talk about this, Jeanette, but there was a recent federal court decision, including a Third Circuit case in 2024 and a Virginia due process ruling that just came out a couple months ago. And in these cases, the judges or the judicial officers said in plain terms that ASHA's position is not sufficient to override a child's rights under the law.
That's
So,
amazing.
yeah, so that's huge, right? Like, so now we're getting some actual rulings that kind of are saying what you said, right? Like, that's a position, but that's all it is, and that's not enough to override a child's rights. Which
Yeah.
the biggest one I see, that I'm fighting for is the right to education. I mean, that one's so huge. That's just what we're seeing getting denied over and over and over. So what does that tell you about where you think we're heading potentially?
I think we've cracked some of the shell. I think again, they know that they can't fight this. They can't fight these things that we're doing. If SLPs continue to go after this and make changes in their states, ASHA can't fight back because they are a membership association. They are regulated by the FTC, and there are clear rules that say what they can and cannot do in terms of fighting back from people taking action. So for us, they know they can't do anything. For you, this ruling is huge, right? Because they don't, again, when you put it plainly, like I did at the top of the episode, they're like the Girl Scouts. We always say the SLPs love to earn badges from ASHA. They're like the Girl Scouts, the Boy Scouts, any membership association, that's what it's like. And so when you start looking at it for what it really is, it makes the fight in your head a little easier. But
I love that.
It's getting people like judges, and that's the case that you have to make. And that's where I think a lot of the research that we've pulled together is helpful to show that they aren't a governing body. Here's the governing bodies. You're going to fight back on what that SLP said or whoever in your paperwork. You're like, no, this isn't what it says. And this is why we should move forward with what we want. The other thing is, and another really good fight, and I have the benefit, I always say this, because I've seen this field from every angle.
Right.
I am a clinician who has never stopped practicing all the way through my PhD, through all of my jobs, with the exception of my very first year as a professor. They requested that I not work. So I didn't. For 9 months, I only was a professor. And then as soon as school was out, I went and got a job over the summer, even though I was still teaching. So I've always worked. I am a business owner, so I see it through that lens. I see it from the clinical lens. I see it as, I have a family member headed towards dementia, my cognitive impairment. I've been the power of attorney for my great aunt who has now passed, who has had dementia. So I see it as like the family member who's interacting with these recommendations or these therapies that are provided. And I see it as the professor with the PhD in academia who understands that ASHA gives us our accolades. And that is how we get promoted and tenured. And that's how we move up in the trajectory of success or perceived success in the field with a PhD. And it's interesting because when I look at this spelling to communicate issue or the oral motor issue that I've also looked at and interacted with, they're taking the stance of there's no research. There's not right. Good research, or there's only these single subject things. Well, as a dementia expert, I can tell you that a lot, I am very, I wrote a book called Space Retrieval Step by Step and Evidence-Based Memory Intervention.
Oh, wow.
It comes out of the psych field. Space retrieval is a memory strategy that has been used since the 1800s. And there aren't a lot, you can't do a double-blind, randomized controlled trial with this kind of thing, or really with any dementia treatments, because everybody's brain is different. Everybody's therapy has to be a little different. And we accept that as okay. And we still, ASHA supports space retrieval. For a long time, I was their darling. I was named as, they named me as a trailblazer in 2016. And I always joke they weren't prepared that I was going to
what kind of,
get away from
They weren't wrong, Jeanette. They weren't wrong.
They've had me do a ton of stuff for space retrieval. Well, how's it any different with these other areas? And so this is when I look at these things, I get that spelling to communicate could people be taken advantage of? Yes, but children can be taken advantage of anywhere. I mean, there's so many.
That's the argument. That's right? Like that just people.
Wild. Yeah.
It's wild. Yeah.
There's so many families saying that this is working for us. And so they're leaning into the evidence. But what we train our clinicians to know and what we teach in schools and even probably somewhere on ASHA's website, evidence has 3 prongs. It's the best available research, which they're saying isn't there. And okay, I think that's hard to dispute. It's not really there. But it's also clinical expertise And I am certain there are SLPs. In fact, I know there are SLPs out there who support spelling to communicate.
Yep, they're coming out. Mm-hmm.
Right. And patient values and circumstances and or
Lived experience, right? Isn't that supposed to be another one?
it is an equal pie.
Yeah.
Best available research isn't a bigger piece of the pie. All three pieces are equal. And it's interesting that in this case, and the oral motor case, and even some other things that we're not even talking about, all of a sudden the best clinical research available is the only thing we're including. And I'm not someone who has done a ton of research into spelling to communicate. I'm very aware of the controversy within our field where people can get very ugly. But in my mind, if a family is saying this is working, we should support. If nothing else has worked, or if this is what they want to try, who are we to decide what's right for your family? Our job is to help your kid communicate, right? Like, it doesn't matter what my opinion is. It matters what's working to get your kid to communicate. And that's kind of the stance I've taken. It doesn't matter what the research says. If there are this many families saying like, hey, this is working for us, then we need to believe them, right?
There can't be that many people making it up.
Yeah.
Right?
Like victim blaming, like, oh, you dressed the wrong way, or he
Yes.
he's a politician. Well, what? Like, it's just wild to me. And I think maybe this is getting so much attention because there's folks like you putting it out there and screaming from the mountaintops. And so I think too, you've cracked the shell there. Like, people just need to dig in, keep screaming, keep pushing and pushing against them, and it will eventually crumble. And again, I said everything takes so long. It might be years, but just think about the legacy that you're leaving for the kids and the families that are coming after you, right? Like,
oh, absolutely.
But you're making inroads for the generations to come. And that's kind of how I look at Fix SLP, is like, I may not see the immediate change of the CCC never being required, but the work I'm doing now is planting seeds for 10 and 20 years down the road. And that is a legacy, right? So that's kind of my view. Is we cracked it. I cracked it. You guys cracked it. That case cracked it. Keep cracking, because the cracks will shatter and it will fall.
Yeah, I'm curious from your standpoint. I appreciate that, Jeanette. Again, we're birds of a feather in the sense that we're see something, we just go after it, and we're relentless and won't stop. I mean, knowing what you know, and again, this is all conjecture, of course, but why do you think they are so dug in on this with spelling to communicate and RPM and this methodology? Is it? Well, I'll just let you answer it, because I've got my theories, of course, but you have a very different perspective that I would love to hear.
I'm not sure. Again, this is my opinion.
Yeah.
But again, the people who control ASHA, there is ASHA staff, which is really hard to figure out, like, who's controlling the narrative there, because they are the ones who are consistent and consistently there across decades that kind of maintain the status quo. And most of them aren't speech pathologists anymore. These are hired folks from wherever. But then you have the SLPs, or the PhDs really, who take these board positions, who are not paid, but again, get paid more at their universities for doing work like this. They get their tenure, they get their promotion, they get, sometimes they can trade in teaching hours to do things like this. So, it's called like comp time or whatever, where
instead
of teaching a course, they get those hours to be ASHA president. And not everybody does that, but, there are perks and benefits, even though they're unpaid. They're definitely benefiting from the system. And I would have to guess that there are people in your space who have research out, support something else, and perhaps their life's work would be threatened, like, if we allow something else in. And I can't say that for sure because I don't know like who's on the board and who's behind the practice portal putting out the recommendations. And I just know, like, from what I've heard from the oral motor folks, is they've had a hard time getting any kind of paper, research, or presentation accepted at our national convention for years. Well, the people that they're bringing in to help make these choices to approve these talks already don't like oral motor. So, of course, they're not going to choose anything. So I have to assume that whoever at the top is making the decisions to bring people like that in is doing the same thing for spelling to communicate. And so it's just, and then it's ingrained in us. Well, it's not okay. So even if it, maybe that person has moved on because again, these positions aren't lifetime positions, but this is the stance we took. So now we need to do everything in our power to uphold what we decided wasn't okay. And we see that with everything with ASHA. What we say all the time is they refuse to modernize. They refuse to modernize.
That's one of your big complaints, right?
And it's if they would just modernize and change the way they do things, I think a lot would change. And so some of these therapies or techniques that have more evidence or are becoming more successful, or maybe there was abuse with spelling to communicate 50 years ago, but there's not now. Kind of like ABA. ABA is another like hot topic one in our field where it is changing how we're providing that now. Again, I'm not an ABA person, but I know that there are still families saying this is working for us, and that abusive component is maybe being taken out of it, but we can't support it because we never have. And even though it's changing, we still can't support it. And so I think that it starts, I have to suspect it starts from someone who doesn't like it for a specific reason, who's on that committee that has something to protect. That's my guess, because it all comes down to money with them. Everything is about money. Nothing that I see is for the best of the community, SLPs, or the people who receive our services. It's always about what's best for ASHA, and they have shown that over and over and over again. I always say they just drop content in my lap. I don't even have to go look for it.
Right. They
just, it's self-preservation there. It's self-preservation. So the decision, and now they have to preserve.
Well, you and I come at this from different perspectives, obviously, different experiences and all that. But I think we've kind of come to a very similar conclusion. Like you said, it's about money. You touched on something before when you talked about the families who have had success at this, and and the role that lived experience counts as evidence, right? Like you said, that's one of the three prongs. And what again, so many people outside of this world, or reporters, this is one of the things that drives me crazy. They love to frame it as it's like we're just this desperate group of parents that just want to believe anything. We're just so desperate, we're just going to believe it. Failing to acknowledge that most of us have come to this place only after years, in our case, 10 years plus of speech therapy, multiple years of, everyone has exhausted everything else, AAC devices. And then when you find something, a methodology, this technique, whatever you want to frame it, that works, and your child's unlocked, and you finally get to connect with them, right? Like, there's nothing like that. And then to have people call you, delusional, or people want to protect their turf so much, that money means so much, that they would rather keep these children locked and try to claim that it's more dangerous for them to communicate at any level. We'd much rather keep them silent. Somehow that's safer for them. It's preposterous.
Also, there's no evidence for that either.
Right.
Evidence that shows that they're safer.
That's a great point.
Also, is there clinical expertise showing that they're safe? You know what I mean? Like, it's just wild when they take these stances. We are the experts in some things, but we are not the experts in everything. And maybe that's the other thing too, is spelling to communicate didn't come out of the speech world, correct? That came from somewhere else. She wasn't a
well,
was she?
She was actually, yeah. Actually, Elizabeth, so that, it's kind of, when you look at this space, there's been kind of different iterations. Okay. Spelling to communicate came from RPM.
Okay.
And RP, and Elizabeth Vossler, who kind of is the mother of S2C, is actually an SLP. And that's one of the things and she, I think it's one of the beefs that ASHA had with her. I think I want to make sure I get the story straight. I probably didn't, but there's something with the CCC with her as well. But she actually has that background and expertise, and they've tried, so that was one of the things they tried to go after her earlier. It's like, oh, she's not a credentialed. She let her credentials drop, so you can't take her seriously. Blah blah blah.
So that leads me to another thought, where politics becomes involved. We have something called, we'll call it neuromuscular electrical stimulation that physical therapists use all the time on large muscle groups. Okay. Now I may also tell this story incorrectly because I was not a practicing speech pathologist when all of this happened. However, some of the people who have trained me were there and know the story. So take this for what it's worth. There might be some incorrect details, but from what I understand, there was an SLP actually I'm in Ohio. I've mentioned Ohio a couple times. From what I understand, it happened in Ohio. An SLP in an Ohio hospital started taking the stimulation machine, the little, electrical stimulation machine, and putting it on the neck muscles for swallowing, and was getting success. Because if it works for your legs and your arms, why wouldn't it work for your neck, right? And I think she was doing it for quite some time. And then the hospital came and said, this is a liability. This is almost like using a drug for like black box reasons, like off-label reasons. You need to either stop doing this or do research. Well, she was a master's level clinician, not trained in research, no PhD. So she did a study. And from what I understand, there were some there were flaws in methodology.
Right. Okay, I got you. Yeah.
Okay. So there were flaws, and she went to a major conference for swallowing. I won't name it, but a major conference where doctors and all the top SLPs were, and she presented it. And I guess they ripped her apart. And from what I understand, she stormed out of that. And this could be like SLP legend, but from what I was told, she was basically like, F you, and left and kept doing what she was doing and continued to research. And now has an entire company that is like the leading NMES company for swallowing. But if you ask ASHA about neuromuscular stimulation for swallowing, it's not a thing. It doesn't help people. And I think there is now that more people have looked at it, there is some valid stuff. Like there's many, many, many muscles in the throat, whereas in your thigh, there's like one big one. And so maybe it doesn't recruit the deeper muscles, but there are some muscles that it can help. There is validity to using it sometimes. It's not the kitchen sink approach where it works for everyone.
Right, of course.
But again, ASHA took a stance because of politics. It wasn't even money at that point. It was politics. She didn't play the game. She didn't have the credential. She wasn't a PhD. She wasn't in academia. She wasn't the ASHA elite. And they didn't like it. Instead of saying, hey, let's take this and refine it. Why don't you come with me and work with me in my lab? Let's take this on and do a better study.
Right.
They attacked her, right? Like, because our community is often gross. Like it's what we see, your parents see those comments online about S2C or whatever. Like it's the same thing in academic circles, right? And not everybody is like that. I've certainly had one.
No, but
that's how this stuff gets started. And I mean, this was in the 80s, maybe early 90s. Look at how many decades have gone by and we're still saying, we don't use that, right? Like,
yeah.
And so that could be too, if she there could be a politics layer there too. If she was an SLP and wasn't playing the academic game appropriately, that could be the only reason. I mean, that right there could be the reason. Yeah. I didn't realize she was a speech therapist.
Yeah. Well, Jeanette, thank you. Truly. I mean, this,
Sure.
like, as we said, this is a conversation I've wanted to have on the show for a long time. And the timing, I think, couldn't have been more right. And, I want to mention something to our listeners and viewers. What Jeanette's described, an organization with no official legal authority in our schools, using a credential structure so effectively to control what methods our children's therapists are allowed to use, and a financial model that gives an organization a direct interest in keeping the options narrow. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is a documented structure that exists, and it's one families in this community have been running into often without knowing it for years. We've seen it in the courtrooms, we've seen it in IEP meetings, we've seen it in evaluations that undersell our children, and in the professionals who follow ASHA's position, not because the science supports it, but because their livelihoods depend on staying in line. So I want you to know this is changing, as we're talking about. This is changing. Courts are saying so, advocates like Jeanette are saying so, and families like ours are saying so. I wanted to talk about briefly a coalition I've started called Communicators for Communication Rights, or C4CR. And you can find the website at comforcomrights.org. We'll have the link in the notes. So this exists because communication is a human right for every non-speaking person, for every person for that matter. Every family that's been told their child's way of communicating does not count. I'm building it as a platform where families, advocates, and professionals can come together and push for the change that our children deserve. So here's what I'm asking you to do today. If you know someone, or if you've been told by a school district, a therapist, or evaluator that ASHA's position is the reason a communication method cannot be used or considered, I want to hear from you. Your story matters, not just for your family, but because the pattern of harm that ASHA's position has caused is something we need to document. We want to have the data, we want to name it, and we want to bring it to light. So again, you can find C4CR at comforcomrights.org, and you can find Jeanette, Fix SLP, at fixslp.com. Right,
Yeah.
Jeanette?
Yep. Or you can email me at team, at fixslp.com. At any given time, I have hundreds of emails to respond to. I do respond to every single email, but sometimes you hear back from me 2 months later. You could always message me on social media. I am also the one who responds to that. But again, depending on what's going on in our field, I could have hundreds of messages there too. I do the best I can. Again, I own a business, have 2 kids. I am a Girl Scout. I'm a Girl Scout leader. I'm a lifetime girl. I have other things. So I do the best I can. And yeah, I love connecting with people, and I do respond to everyone. It just takes a really long time. So reach out.
Yeah, I can vouch for that. I can vouch. Jeanette does get back to you. So Jeanette, thank you again for joining me. Thank you for the work you do every day. And again, all of you out there, thank you for listening and supporting the lighter side of the spectrum. We will catch you next time.